Good morning, everybody. I'm really excited to be here at Scale in Berlin. And today, I want to talk to you about how to build a culture of experimentation. And here's the key. The key to building a culture of experimentation, the key to innovation, is all about embracing failure. Raise your hand if every day your company embraces failure and celebrates it. All right, we got one, we got two. Well, I hope by the end of this talk, we'll put you on a path for more of you to be raising your hands, because embracing failure is the only way that you can actually innovate. So in order to tell this story, I need to tell a little bit of the story of my own, because I had to build a company that did just this. So let me tell you a little bit about what I do at Matter, and then I'll talk about how we built the culture that we built. So at Matter, we are an early-stage venture capital firm and startup accelerator, and we have two customers. On one side, we support early-stage media entrepreneurs who we believe have the potential to build the next great media institution. And on the other side, we work with 100-year-old media institutions like the New York Times in order to help them strengthen themselves by building a more user-centered, prototype-driven culture to make them stronger and more agile for what the world is going to throw at them. And we do this because we believe that when you have a strong media ecosystem, you can build a more informed, a more empathetic, and a more inclusive society, which the world really needs right now. So we support our entrepreneurs through a 20-week program. We invest in them, and we support them through a structured 20-week program that helps them build scalable media ventures through a human-centered, prototype-driven process called design thinking. Basically, at its core, you can think of Matter as design thinking process as applied to early-stage entrepreneurship and venture capital, as applied to the future of media that matters. Now, why does this matter in the first place? Why do I and my team and my entrepreneurs wake up doing the hard work we do every single day? Media institutions are the bedrock of our democracy. But today, especially in the United States, they are now under threat politically. I'm sorry. They are now under threat culturally, and they are also have been under threat for a while economically. And this is really important because as the strength of our media ecosystem erodes, so do our core democratic values. So at Matter, we believe we need strong media institutions more than ever in order to build a more informed society, in order to close this massive empathy gap that we have in our communication right now, and to support more inclusive media and more diverse leaders within media. It's really, really important. So that's why I created Matter, and that's why I do what I do. But what I want to talk about today is that I believe that you can leverage design thinking for anything. We apply it to media, but you can apply it to whatever focus area you want to apply it to. You can take design thinking, use it for entrepreneurship or internal innovation, and apply it to any area that you want. But let's talk about what design thinking is to begin with. So raise your hand, have you ever heard the term design thinking? Okay, awesome, great. Many of you, before I went off to Stanford Business School 10 years ago, I had never really heard of the term design thinking. And so when I thought about design, it was something different than I think about it today. So just to be clear what I'm talking about, design is not an aesthetic. It's not an event that happens. Design is not an experience, although you can design amazing experiences. Design is not a product, although you can design amazing products. At its core, design is a process. Design is a way of coming up with something new or making something better that is both feasible, viable, and desirable. Or said in other terms, that hits the intersection of business, technology, and meeting a real deep customer need. Now, there are a lot of ways to visualize design thinking process, and I don't claim any one is better than the other. But to me, at its core, design essentially is a series of flaring and focusing, knowing how and when to be generative, and knowing how and when to select and execute. And what you want to do is you want to flare and focus as many times as possible in the time that you have. Flaring and focusing, flaring and focusing, flaring and focusing, so that you can successfully do what I call the drunken walk of the entrepreneur. This is literally what success looks like in innovation. It is not a straight line up and to the right. It is a drunken walk. You make hypotheses, you test them, you learn from them, and you end up in a place that you never ever could have predicted if you had just sat in a room and tried to come up with the next big thing. It's all about taking actions and learning and being able to discover where you go. So the design process, it feels really messy. This is what it feels like. It's not a perfect plan at all. And so on your team, how do you embrace the ambiguity of this process if this is what you're supposed to be doing? So design is a process, but it's also a mindset. And one of the mindsets we talk about in design is to be mindful of your process, right? If your team doesn't know exactly where it's going, what do you come back to? What do you hang on to? And the answer is process. The process will help lead the way. Trust the process. So design is about mindsets as well. And there's 3 really important mindsets to design thinking. Number 1, believing in radical collaboration. Number 2, being human-centered. And number 3, building a culture of prototyping or being prototype-driven. So what do I mean by those? Radical collaboration. Innovation happens not by getting 4 of the same experts together to try to solve a really hard problem. Innovation happens through the random lateral connections that are made across disciplines. So the more diverse your team, the more likely it is that you are going to be able to succeed and come up with something new. When we look for entrepreneurs, we look for teams that represent business, design, technology, and media, right? All coming together at once. And we look for as diverse of teams as possible. Second is being human-centered. What does that mean? That means that everything comes back to your user, your customer that you're designing for. That means that before you actually define the problem you're solving, you get out into the world and you spend time with your customers in order to be inspired and actually find real problems to solve, rather than making up problems that you think might be the ones to solve. It also means once you come up with ideas, actually taking those prototypes and going back to your users and testing them, and knowing that it's going to be imperfect until you actually try it and validate with your customers. And finally, building a culture of prototyping. This is all about embracing imperfection. You think of everything as an imperfect prototype that has to be tested. All of the ideas that you have for starting companies, etc., they're all not very good ideas right now. They're not good ideas right now. Every great company started with a bad idea that then got tested and iterated on. So I challenge you to think of everything as a prototype, an imperfect prototype to be tested. And that's not just your product. That includes your team, testing out whether your team works well or not, really fast. And so you have this messy process, and a lot of people at first think, oh man, that's really inefficient, right? That's really inefficient. The design process feels inefficient, but it's actually one of the most efficient processes. And so if you can think about it this way, think about the cost of making an error for your project timeline, right? Where would you rather fail? Would you rather fail here, where it's way too late, or would you rather fail really early? Really early, right? Because if you fail early, it doesn't cost a lot, and then you can recover from that. The other thing to think about is the risk of the project that you're launching, right? The risk goes down over time, the number of build cycles you go through, right? So even though it might feel inefficient to try something and fail, it's actually the less risky, least costly way of doing things, and it's actually how innovation happens. So that's a brief overview of how to think about design thinking. Design is a process backed up by certain mindsets every day. And matter, again, is a combination of design thinking as applied to entrepreneurship as applied to the future of media. Now, how did I come up with this in the first place? Well, I went on my own drunken walk of the entrepreneur. I started my career as a TV producer and journalist making films for a show called Frontline on public television in the United States. It's the last bastion of long-form documentary television. If you asked me then, would I ever be a venture capitalist or understand anything about business or design, I would say, no way. I have no idea and no aspirations for that. But about 12 years ago, I got worried about the future of our industry, and I wanted to get out to Silicon Valley and learn how that worked. And so I left one of the best jobs in broadcast journalism and headed out west and went to Stanford Business School and learned everything I could around entrepreneurship and innovation. And while I was there, I got a little frustrated because everything they taught you as an entrepreneur started with, the case studies where, so-and-so has this business and they're trying to do X, Y, and Z. But they never answered the question, I want to be an entrepreneur. How do I actually take the first step, going from nothing to something? And while I was there, I got lucky, and I stumbled across this place at Stanford called the D School, which taught this design thinking process, which I had never heard of before. But I immediately fell in love with it, and I saw the opportunity to apply design thinking process to early stage entrepreneurship. I thought, this is what you can use to answer the question, I want to be an entrepreneur. How do I start? How do I find the business that I want to build? So I joined the D School, built out their curriculum around that, and then a few years later, I ended up getting recruited by somebody who was founding a venture capital firm for Eric Schmidt of Google to build an incubator based on the principles that I had developed at Stanford. That was my first ever experience within venture, but I jumped at the opportunity, built that for 2 years, and then 5 years ago, had the opportunity to put everything together I've done in my life to start what would become Matter. And along that journey, I was really inspired by a quote that I had read by Clay Shirky, who was writing about the failure of the newspaper industry in the United States. And he said this. He said, if the old model is broken, what will work in its place? And the answer is, nothing will work, but everything might. Now is the time for lots and lots of experiments. And so I said, what if we built that place where those experiments could happen? A place that supported early stage entrepreneurs trying to build the future of media on one side, but also supported really important institutions like the New York Times on the other side. And most importantly, what if every single day we thought about building and reinforcing a culture of experimentation, a culture that embraced failing fast to succeed sooner, which in my time in Silicon Valley, that's the one thing that I learned, that failure is the key to innovation. Failure is the key to innovation. So I decided to build that place, and it's called Matter. We launched in San Francisco in 2015, and then last year we expanded to New York City. And since that time, we have supported 142 entrepreneurs. In our first fund and 3 cohorts, we did 19 investments, and then we expanded to doing 43 investments in our second fund. And over that time period, these little bets that we've started to make are starting to pay off. Our entrepreneurs, our teams have been acquired by BuzzFeed, by change.org, by Medium, by Kickstarter, by Quora, and those are the only ones that I'm allowed to publicly mention at the time. And our fund alone, our second fund alone, has raised almost $40 million, and that's up 128% in the last 12 months. And I tell you this because across these 5 years and these almost 70 investments we've made, I've seen one thing in common. For the startups that succeed that we bet on, there's one thing in common, which is this. They learned to fail fast early. All of our successful startups failed after we invested in them. And then they recovered and they built themselves on a trajectory to be a successful company. So let me tell you about some examples here. So the first investment that we ever made was in a company called Ziga. It was in this amazing group of entrepreneurs. The guy with the beard, he actually spent about 5 years in Berlin before we invested in him. These were some of the most creative entrepreneurs and creative teams in thinking about the future of media that I had ever met. But they were inexperienced. They had no experience in design thinking process. They had no experience in building for mobile. They actually had built a product that was web only, and they had no experience in for-profit entrepreneurship. But what we saw in them was the potential of what they could do. So we decided to invest in them. They went through our bootcamp, learned design thinking for the first time, and started applying it to their venture. And after doing a lot of tests with potential customers, they came to me about 6 weeks into the program, and they said, Corey, we know that you just invested in us, but we've just decided to kill Ziga. We've just decided to kill Ziga. And in that moment, I wasn't mad at all, right? I just invested in this company, and now they're deciding to kill their company. I was really happy because I knew in that moment that they would be successful. Because what I found is that entrepreneurs who, we use this expression, kill their puppies, I know that sounds bad, but who make the decision to kill something that is very dear to them, they're the ones that normally succeed, because then they build it from back up. So they use the rest of the program to take what they've learned, do a mobile-first approach, and to use design thinking to build their product. And they ended up building this amazing product called Pop, which then went on to receive 2 rounds of consecutive seed investment from Chris Sacca, who is probably the most famous seed venture capitalist in the United States, and got a lot of traction, and then ended up being acquired by BuzzFeed. And BuzzFeed, probably the hottest media company at that time, acquired this company so that they could lead all of mobile product for BuzzFeed. So this is a team that had never experienced design thinking, had never designed for mobile before, and then 18 months later, the hottest media company in the world is acquiring them so that they could do that for them. Another example, a team called Huzza, a really strong engineering team who came into our program thinking that their product was, all they needed to do during our program was focus on building their product and everything else would be fine. They didn't have to change anything. Well, they soon got a lot of feedback on their product, and what they were trying to do was create, they had an app that basically enabled you to listen to musicians and to tip them if you liked if you liked their music, right? What they learned really quickly was this wasn't differentiated enough. This has been tried a million different times, and it just wasn't differentiated enough. So they took that feedback, and about 6 weeks into the program, they came to me, and they said, Corey, I know that you just invested in us, and I know last week we said we were just going to be focused on just building this product and getting it into the right place. We're actually going to kill this product, and we need to start from the ground up. And I said, good, I think that means you're going to be successful. And so they went out into the world, they looked at different trends going on, And they found some really interesting things were about to happen in live video. And so they said, let's support musicians in a new way. And they ended up building a live video platform that enabled musicians like Amanda Palmer to broadcast her concerts and to have their fans actually interact in a very innovative way and give tips in that way. And so they were off and running. They pitched it at our demo day. They got a lot of interest from both potential partners and from investors. And one of them actually approached them and acquired them. They were acquired by Kickstarter. And in February, Kickstarter launched a platform called Kickstarter Live that is a way for creators to interact with their fans through live video and to receive pledges for their projects. So we have a company who started by not doing anything in live video, killing their product, and ending up building the video platform that powers the most powerful crowdfunding platform in the world. And finally, a team called Thankroll. They had a similar mission. Again, two of the most creative entrepreneurs that I've ever met. What they wanted to do was, again, support creatives, and for them it was writers, in being able to make money off of their work. So they came up with something called Thankroll, which was the ability for audiences to pledge money to writers. And they pitched it at one of our design reviews early on, and they got some pretty terrible feedback. If you see her face right there, she's kind of contemplating the failure right now. And what they learned, this wasn't innovative enough, right? It was very similar to Patreon. How is it actually different than a company like Patreon? So they came to me and they said, we've been thinking about this. It's about 6 weeks in, and we don't think this is going to work. So what did they decide to do? Burn it down, right? They killed it. They took what they learned. They went on our design sprints, and they ended up focusing on actually a space that was taking off, augmented reality. And so they ended up building a company called Aconite, which supports creatives in a completely different way. They built this AR platform that enables authors and writers to make interactive games on an augmented reality platform. They built that in less than 6 weeks. They pitched it at our Matter demo day, and some of the best venture capitalists in the world invested $2.3 million in their business, and they are off and running, something they never thought they would do. So the question here is, how do we help our startups fail fast? This doesn't happen by accident, right? It happens by building an intentional culture. So it happens because we have intentionally built a culture of experimentation that embraces failing forward to succeed sooner. I see my job as a leader, my number one job as a leader, is to create this culture. So how do you do that? How do you build a culture of experimentation? So I think I can break it down into 3 things. First, you need to bet on people, not ideas. Second, you need to actively build culture through experiential learning. And third, you need to create a safe space for your teams to regularly fail fast. And so at Matter, we do, number 1, through our selection process, we have something called the mini project that I'll talk about. Number 2, we run a really intensive design thinking bootcamp that sets the foundation for our entrepreneurs. And number 3, and most importantly, we run something called a monthly design review. So I'm going to talk about each one of these, and my hope is that you take them, you steal them, and you use them in your own organization to build a culture of experimentation. So number 1, bet on people, not ideas, right? The only constant in early stage entrepreneurship and innovation is change. The only constant is change. So it doesn't make any sense to be betting on the ideas people are pitching. The ideas are just a way to evaluate the people and the team. So at Matter, what we actually try to determine is can these entrepreneurs successfully navigate this fog of entrepreneurship, right? So what we do, yes, we hear their pitches and we do all the normal stuff venture capitalists do, but we actually give them a test. We give them a project that tests actually how they are approaching building their venture. And it goes a little bit like this. We say, you only have 8 hours for this project, and we want you to do the following things. We want you to take your venture, and we want you to break it down into viability, feasibility, and desirability, or business, technology, and customer. Once you've done that, state your top 3 hypotheses in each areas. What are the key risks that could kill you? Okay, now, circle 1 in each of those buckets, and then, again, in less than 8 hours, we want you to get out into the world, and we want you to track down the top experts in the world and the top customers to test your hypotheses on. And they can't be anybody that you've ever talked to before. Go out there, talk to them, test your hypotheses, synthesize what you've learned, and then come back and communicate that to us and your team and make a decision about what you're going to be doing tomorrow with that limited time and limited information. That's what entrepreneurs do, right? They have to do that every single day. So why don't we actually test that in our selection process? So we do that to see whether they can navigate the drunken walk of the entrepreneur. The next thing that we do is once we've selected all of our teams, we run them through a really intensive design thinking bootcamp. So we have 12 teams who show up at our offices in San Francisco. We open up our garage doors, we let them in. They've never met each other before. And we instantly put them through a 1-week-long intensive boot camp focused on learning the design thinking process. And we do that both for our entrepreneurs and for our media partners. And so over the course of, first they do a 2-hour design thinking exercise to get a sense of what this is. And then over 3 days, we mix up their teams and we have them build a venture from scratch using this process. And the reason why we do that is adults learn not through actually talking. They learn through experiences. So the more that you can create experiences on your team to actually practice something like design thinking, the more likely it is you'll succeed in actually having them practice that going forward. And finally, and I think this is the most important and the most unique thing that we do, we focus on creating a safe space for our teams to regularly fail fast. And we do that through something called a design review. We do this every month in our process, in our program. You'll see we do it right at the beginning, and we do it once every month. And here's how it works. It's pretty simple, but it's the most powerful thing that we do. First, the stated goal is always to fail fast and get feedback. Everybody who comes to a design review hears me say that about 50 times. So it's really important that I reinforce that. We fill the room with about 50 of our 275 mentors in our network, and we have a panel of about 6 experts across business, design, technology, storytelling. And our entrepreneurs pitch their venture and demo their product using the current hypotheses that they have. They might not be sure whether they need to go left or right, and I say, just pick one, pitch it hard, and you'll learn a lot by doing that, and you can always change where you go the next day. So these pitches evolve over time. So they pitch, and then what we do is all about going from pitching to receiving feedback. And so I have a list of these 13 different questions that I then ask the audience to raise their hand whether they thought that the entrepreneurs answer these questions successfully. It's really hard to be an entrepreneur. You need to nail all of these questions. So I won't go through all of them, but some examples are, is there a clear bottom-up user point of view? Can you imagine who the customer is? Do they have a deep need? Do you imagine the context? Do the top-down trends in this space make this space worth pursuing? Is there a rising tide? Every entrepreneur needs to aim for 2 or 3 trends that are colliding 2 years out that are creating an opportunity for them, and so on and so forth. So everybody in the room raises their hand whether the entrepreneur did that or not. And this is a very public way of receiving feedback right away. And it's really important because most entrepreneurs don't nail these at first. And when you have a whole room of people not raising your hand, it's more powerful than me telling them they need to work on something. We then turn it over to our panel, and we give them 8 minutes of feedback time to give feedback to the entrepreneurs. And the whole goal here is I want the panelists to be telling our entrepreneurs what was going on in their head while they were hearing this pitch. What were the risks that were popping up in their minds? And the entrepreneurs do a very particular thing here. Does anybody notice what these entrepreneurs are doing right after they pitch? They're listening, right? So we have a strict rule. After you pitch, you can't answer any questions. You can't get defensive. All you can do is sit there and take notes. And at the end, just say thank you. So that's really, really important to what we do. The audience gives feedback as well. And then the next day, we collect all of that feedback. And as a group, we go through each and every team, and we sort out what we think they should do next. And then really importantly, what we do is we allow the entrepreneurs to decide what they do next. It's their company, so we can't tell them what to do. They decide what they want to focus on next. So that's the design review. And then they go from one to the other. And overall, again, the goal is to create a safe space for these entrepreneurs to fail fast. Now that seems really simple, right? I actually think it's something that all of you could do. Take this, steal this, do this in your organizations. There's actually nothing more powerful. And I'll show you one last example here of how that affected one of our teams. We invested in a team called Pepero. It's actually a British team, but right out of Harvard. And they had built this online commenting platform for millennials. So millennials in college who are reading articles, they could comment and share an article that they are talking about. And we really loved this team. The concept was so-so. And in their first design review, they got a lot of feedback. And that feedback didn't go so well for them. They really learned that this was going to be a tough go. So guess what? They came to me about 4 weeks into the program, and they said, you know what? I know you just invested in us, but we think we have to kill Pepero. And I said, great, run with it. But they said this to me. They said, here's what we're going to do. We love what we've learned. This has opened up our eyes to how you be an entrepreneur. We're going to use every single design review. We're going to do a 1-month sprint. At each design review, we're going to pitch a new business. And then the next day, we're going to make a go, no-go decision on that business. And we either continue or we kill it and we go again. So I said, okay, go for it. So then, at the next design review, they pitched this business called Pinstacart. From Pepero to Pinstacart. So Pinstacart, I think it had something to do with Instagram had just released its API, and so this was a way to like buy furniture via Instagram immediately. I thought that was kind of funny. They pitched that business. They actually got decent feedback on it, but as entrepreneurs, they said, you know what? We don't want to spend our lives building something called Pinstacart. That was a good exercise, but we're going to kill it. So then, 6 weeks before demo day, and demo day is when you have the top venture capitalists in media and media partners come together and hear your final pitch. 6 weeks before demo day, they had nothing. And they decided, we're going to use the design process and talk to experts in virtual reality and see what we find out. And by demo day, they had built a company called Meta with a complete working prototype of an immersive virtual reality world, all in 6 weeks. And investors got excited, media partners got excited, and they came up to me afterwards and they said, man, that was such a great bet that you made. They must have been working on this for 1.5 years, 2 years or so. Literally 6 weeks. 6 weeks they built it. They got a lot of investor interest. They were about to close a round, but then they said, you know what? We don't think this is going to work. Virtual reality adoption is just not there yet. We can't do an immersive virtual reality platform and experience yet, but we can do something similar. So they built a company called Pi, which is a 360 video platform, the first step on the way to virtual reality. And they ended up closing a large seed round by doing that. And so let's just recap what happened here. We invest in a team. They come in with a company called Papero, which is all about online commenting for millennials. They then build a company called Pinstacart, which I don't even know exactly what that does. They then, in 6 weeks, build a virtual reality company, almost close investment on it, and decide to kill that. And then they build a 360 video company, and they're still off and running in it today. So the thing here is that this is not random. This is failure by design. This is failure by design. This is how innovation works. And so it's actually successful that they killed their startups in order to find the next ones. So overall, in summary, how do you build a culture of experimentation? It is all about embracing failure. Bet on people, not ideas. We do that through this mini project. Build a culture through experiential learning. Adults learn through experiences. We do that through our 1-week bootcamp. And most importantly, create a safe space for your teams to regularly fail fast through something like our design review. Thank you very much.